Well, thanks, Brian. Welcome to another session of Film Forum. Tonight's guests are from the Armidale Film and Television School. We have Diane Murphy and Quinn O'Donnell with us tonight, and tonight's subject is going to be the American Civil War, films and documentaries. And we're going to look at three works in particular. We're going to look at Gone with the Wind, Cold Mountain, and Ken Burns' 10-part documentary series, The Civil War. I have to confess that I don't know where it comes from, whether I'm a bit of a old art house film snob, but it had taken me a long time to finally sit down and watch Gone with the Wind. And this week, as part of my homework, I watched it and I was surprised. I loved it. I loved just looking at the craft of it as much as anything and being in awe of the epic quality. I wasn't as taken by the actual story, and I thought it was very sentimental and a little weak, but anyway. But first, Diane, violence on the screen. What's your attitude?
Well, I don't know. I don't really like overly graphic things like violence and all that. But I guess I know I'm a bit desensitized, and I know most people have become quite desensitized by it because it's shown on the news every day, and there's so many movies full of violence, and so I don't know. I think if it's relating to Cold Mountain, I think they used it. They used the violence to try and grab the audience and maybe impact them somehow, because that's the only thing that gets audiences these days, basically. So
yeah,
that or sex.
Yes, violence,
and
sex, and
Cold
drugs.
Mountain had a bit of both.
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah.
Quinn, your attitudes about violence in cinema and on television?
Violence, I think, as Diane said, we've become desensitized to it, I think, because of the news and, Iraq, 9/11, all that sort of stuff. In the movies, I think you need a bit of violence because, it grabs the attention. In Cold Mountain, it is very, very graphic, but that's probably what it would have been like in the American Civil War, I think. The Passion of the Christ was violent. The Patriot was very violent. I thought that was violent. But I like The Patriot, and I like Cold Mountain. I haven't seen Passion of the Christ, but I would like to see it.
Same here.
Yeah, but I think you need a bit of violence.
Well, speaking about violence, we have heard that there is actually going to be a remake of Gone with the Wind, and we've heard that it's probably, now that it's been made in the 21st century, that it probably is going to have a hell of a lot more graphic violence. There's talk of possibly having some of the battle scenes shown, which we never really saw battle. We saw the aftermath of battle in Gone with the Wind. So I thought for the latest in that situation, we might cross to our correspondent, Dan, who is in Hollywood. Dan, are you there? Oh no, it's Abraham Lincoln. No, it can't be. No, it's the Premier. Miss Dan, are you there? Dan.
How you doing, Paul? Sorry about that. Just wandered off a little bit. Just the latest news from Hollywood. Washington on the West Coast has declared war on New York on the East Coast over who will control the movie industry. It's going to be the latest civil war. Leading the attack for the West Coast is General George Lucas and his attempt to remake his latest movie, Star Wars 300. He's recently enslaved thousands of innocent Australians to do so. Leading the advance from the East Coast is Field Marshal Spielberg, making his latest epic Schneider's List, his sequel to his movie Schindler's List. It's not going to be a picnic in the park with the deep southerners from Mexico joining in the war. It's going to be long, bloody and arduous. We're going to end up with the long, hard-to-watch epics from the East, the glitzy, witsy, fancy movies from the West, or the cheapo movies from down south. I guess we'll have to wait till the end to find out. experts in the industry just can't hang on a second. Just in. The EU has joined in the war. They're hoping that their art house films will bring them to the top of the industry. We'll bring more to you as the story progresses, Paul. Back to you.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Art house taking over mainstream. Well, I've heard it all. Just an interesting little sideline there. Thinking of Cold Mountain, we did actually have quite a big Australian component there with Nicole Kidman and John Searle and the first AD. But it also makes me think about a kind of possibility of a civil war erupting here, where we might have, downtrodden rural people up here in New England vying for resources against the wealthy there in Sydney. Anyway, we can ponder on that. I don't think we'll be calling to arms on that one. Just getting back to violence again, what I thought I might do is have a look at the Paths of Glory clip, because for me, this is a film, having seen a lot of the footage of World War I thought this was maybe one of the most realistic pieces, and also given the fact that, have you been watching the Stanley Kubrick films over the last few weeks? I don't know if you remember this scene, but let's have a look at that. Look, I do remember seeing that on the big screen, and because it's all up there in front of you, it was really quite overwhelming. And as I said, it did remind me of a lot of the footage, the real footage I did see in World War I. One of the things I was thinking about with Ken Burns' documentaries is that he didn't ever have any reenactments. And one of the questions that we asked the Premier was, if he was a young film student today, how would he go about producing something about the Civil War? So if someone came in and said, look, Diane, $20 million, I want you to tell the history of the American Civil War, and let's pretend that you actually thought it was a good idea doing it, how would you do it? What sort of techniques?
I think I'd use the same sort of techniques as Ken Burns does, because it's factual, it uses real footage, it does use actors, but it reads out real diary entries and real records of what happened. So I guess if you wanted a factual recollection of the war, you'd do it Ken Burns style. But if you wanted if they said 30 million, we want it to be the best documentary ever, you'd have to put in all the reenactments and all of those sort of big things to try and get the whole audience. Because with the documentaries, you only get a certain group of people, but if you had reenactments and big action sequences, you'd get a wider range of audience.
Yep.
So it'd depend.
Okay. Quinn, your thoughts on that? You've got this huge, you can't even carry around that amount of money.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
If
What techniques?
If I did that, did you say 20 million?
30
we'll
million,
give
20
you
million.
30,
Okay.
but I'm the producer and I'm going to keep 5.
Okay, you can keep 5, so I've got 25. What I would do is I'd spend $1 million on doing probably like the exact same thing as Ken Burns, stills, voiceover, and keep 23 million for me, or 24. I don't know.
That's a fair call.
Yeah.
You'll never work again in the industry.
Yeah.
Okay. What I thought we might do is just have a look at one of the clips where we hear this incredible voiceover, and I'm thinking of the one that Walt Whitman actually, an American poet, and he did a lot of commentary on the war, and his voice is actually read by, oh God, I'm trying to think of his name, isn't it dreadful? Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's roll that clip and have a look and listen.
Can those be men? Are they not really corpses? They lay there, most of them, quite still, but with a horrible look in their eyes. The dead there are not to be pitied as much as some of the living that have come from there, if they can be called living. Walt Whitman.
Pretty hard stuff to look at. I must admit, when I saw that for the first time, I didn't realise that there were the big prisoner of war camps in the Civil War, and it just looked like something out of the Nazi concentration camps. Look, I think we're running out of material here, and we might just open it up to you two to kind of have a little. As a topic, does the American Civil War interest you at all?
Well, not really. I mean, I live in Australia and it's part of American history, so it doesn't really, but in watching these films, you really can't go without connecting, or at least like seeing the humanity of these people who went through so much blood and pain and horror, and I guess you do sort of become drawn into it, so I guess, yeah.
Well, it's interesting you talking about, I live in Australia and that's about America, because a lot of people would say a lot of what our culture is second-hand American culture, and also one of the big criticisms, I guess, of America is that America is very insular. They're only interested in themselves, and having lived there, I'd noticed that. But is that something that you're affected by, that you aren't particularly interested in other parts of the world, or what?
Well, no, not I love to learn like lots of things about other countries and different cultures and all that sort of thing. But I just hate the way that which Australia has. We're trying to have our own identity, and then we've got all these. It seems mainly American that's being filtered into our society, and I think that we should get more. We should just make, especially on TV and movies, we should at least be trying to make more Australian in TVs and movies for the Australian TV.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Quinn, as a subject, does the American Civil War interest you?
Not really. I don't like it that much, you know. Same with Diane, because it happened in America. It's not really that interesting. I don't really like American TV shows that much because they're American. But,
Okay.
yeah, you know, the Hollywood ending and stuff.
I mean, it's interesting that we're kind of hearing this distaste and disdain for the American product, and I mean, maybe I can understand that. And being from the film school, that you want to see more Australian content, so that's a pretty valid response. You've both had a chance to look at these three works. What I thought we might do is we have some material to look at, and I thought we might start by having a look at the Gone with the Wind clip. Can we play that, please?
Doesn't make who you marry, so long as he's a southerner and thinks like you. And when I'm gone, I leave Tara to you.
I don't want Tara. Plantations don't mean anything when...
Do you mean to tell me, Katie Scarlett O'Hara, that Tara, that land doesn't mean anything to you? Why, land is the only thing in the world worth working for, worth fighting for, worth dying for. Because it's the only thing that lasts.
Oh, Paul, you talk like an Irishman.
It's proud I am that I'm Irish. And don't you be forgetting, Missy, that you're half Irish too. And to anyone with a drop of Irish blood in them, why, the land they live on is like their mother. Oh, but there, now you're just a child. It'll come to you, this love of the land. There's no getting away from it if you're Irish.
Well, pretty breathtaking, huh? When I looked at that scene, and that one kind of stood out to me, it was really interesting. I'm just thinking about it more kind of technically as filmmakers, that we went from daylight, they're walking along, and then suddenly it seems to be late afternoon, and we've got that beautiful, the golden hour kind of concept of seeing the last moments of the sun. So we see the sun coming through the clouds as it's about to fall, which is a great backdrop, but it struck me, and I don't know if you picked up on it, that the light was hitting them from the side. The whole thing is so stylized, and the music just heightens it all. So do you find that kitschy or too much, or, and the sorts of films you like, how would that rate? Is that... too much style?
Well, I guess you have to think of it in the context that it was made 30s, early,
39.
Yeah, 39, nearly 40. So it's early film. It's like I was a bit hesitant to see this film because like it's most of the stuff they've got is over exaggerated and like, oh, kiss me now.
Yeah.
So I was a bit hesitant to see it, but I did see it, and it is very stylized, but it's one of the first colour films, and so the audience is being bombarded with all these saturated colours, and I'm pretty sure that, I mean, you've got a more sophisticated audience these days where we come to expect more continuity and more sort of like, oh, that was light and now it's suddenly sunset. But audiences back then...
Do you mean more realism or...?
Yeah, realism. But audiences back then, they were just like appreciating it for what it was, not picking at every little detail. So in the context, it's very good, and I still think it's still a good classic movie today.
Thanks, Diane. Quinn, I was just wondering, you know, you've been studying film for a while here now at the film school. When you go and see a film, do you, like the way I described Gone with the Wind, do you start to think about how things are put together?
Before I came to this school, I just used to watch movies and enjoy them.
So you've been corrupted?
Yeah. Now, I like to watch movies twice. First I just watch it and enjoy it, but then the second time I'll like look at the light and, you know, all that movie stuff and just pick at it and stuff. But just the first time I like to enjoy it.
Yeah. I must admit, for me, you know, coming to film school originally way back, you do seem to go through that period of, I call it corruption, that you start looking at everything technically, and after a while, you do that. You literally go for the ride, and so it's nice to kind of, you know, just sit back. But sometimes there are things that happen where you go, how the hell did they do that? You know, and so there's a bit of the kind of technical thing takes over.
Yeah.
Look, I've just heard that our correspondent in Hollywood wants to talk to us about some recent gossip about a new film about...
Not quite there yet, Paul. We're just live at the Armanel Film and Television School, with a home of Quinn and Diane. And they've now just received a special guest, the Honourable Mr. Bob Carr, the Premier of New South Wales. We'll get back to you with more details later, Paul.
Well, thanks, Dan. Mr. Premier, welcome. And here we are back at Film Forum, and we have a special guest this afternoon, the Premier of New South Wales, Bob Carr, who is joining us to talk about what I believe is one of his favourite subjects, the American Civil War. Is that correct, Mr. Premier?
Oh, it is, yes. Yeah, but the Ken Burns series had a lot to do with it.
So was I right in thinking that went to air in about in the late 90s? Because I know it was made in
early 90s.
It was, okay.
Early 90s. Okay. I think it might have been 91, 92.
Okay. All right. It was made in 19... I seem to remember seeing it in the mid-90s, the first time.
Yeah.
I hear that your specialty is American presidents, is that right?
Yes, yes.
And so you weren't as interested in the Civil War prior to that?
No, it was American political history that interested me, and even today, unlike Kim Beazley, I can't tell you which platoon moved at what hour of the day on what section of the battlefield, but I'm interested in the politics of the Civil War, and I think the Ken Burns series clarified the battlefield activity far better than any written history of the Civil War.
I liked it because it put a human face on all those words that you read, like in ancient history or in modern history at school, and it put a human face on it.
Yeah, it did that as well, yeah. But it made it clear to me what movements were taking place around the battlefields, and I've been to at least half a dozen battlefields, and I appreciated them so much more having seen the series.
If you were, say, a young filmmaker today and you were going to embark on telling the history of the American Civil War, would you use similar techniques that Ken Burns has used?
I think the challenge is that they did it so well, it'd be hard to come up with anything better. I mean, that would be the real challenge for someone doing it.
Right.
and there's a limited store of material as well, and in those 12 episodes, they really did use it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
Is there a black and white photo that they haven't used?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think that is the, I think that's that would be the challenge for someone trying to do anything different on it.
Okay.
We shouldn't be afraid of talking heads, though.
Yes. Well, you're probably a fan of Shelby Foote's writing as well. And actually, could we roll the clip on Shelby Foote, just to get an idea of the style
The
of
Civil War defined us as what we are, and it opened us to being what we became, good and bad things. And it is very necessary, if you're going to understand the American character in the 20th century, to learn about this enormous catastrophe of the mid-19th century. It was the crossroads of our being, and it was a hell of a crossroads.
I love his voice, and I think, if I add up the running time of the American Civil, the Ken Burns series, Shelby Foote is probably up there for a good hour, and he becomes, I think, in many ways the main commentator, adding more of an interpretive look at it.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm proud to have his 3 volumes signed by him.
Ah, right.
And it's a real treat because he doesn't sign his books as a rule, and he's a bit of a recluse. People who try to track him down.
That's as good as having a Salinger signed.
It would be, yes. Yeah, he, very much so. He's a recluse. Someone when I asked this question of Ken Burns, who made the series. He said, no, Shelby Foote stays indoors in his home watching daytime television. You can't get much more of a recluse than that, with all respect to this medium that you work in.
Okay. What we're going to do is we're unfortunately going to have to wind up, and I'd like to thank the Premier for being with us today.
My pleasure.
I'm sure we could talk a lot more about it. Next week on Film Forum, we'll be looking at films in the Balkan War, in particular, Welcome to Sarajevo and Pretty Village, Pretty Flame. Thank you.